Welcome to AIDS 2020 Virtual Daily, brought to you in partnership with Plus Life, where we turn positive into a plus. I'm Karl Schmid. Today we bring you interviews with one of the stars of Netflix's hit Queer Eye, Jonathan Van Ness, and an interview with a young community member in Pakistan doing some amazing work, Romesa Roy William. But before we get to those, let's check in on the science side of AIDS 2020 Virtual. So, yesterday there was big news about injectable PrEP, which could soon become an important new option for HIV prevention. HIV mothers can rest a bit easier as further evidence was presented putting to rest the fears that the HIV drug dolutegravir increases pregnant women's risk of giving birth to babies with neural tube defects. And an HIV cure? Well, not just yet, but there is a report from Brazil about a man who has been off treatment for a year and remains HIV negative, in what may be the first case of long-term HIV remission in an adult without having had a bone marrow transplant. Now, the authors reported that the 34-year-old male who was diagnosed with HIV in 2012 has maintained long-term HIV remission after starting a highly intensified multi-drug antiretroviral therapy and twice-daily nicotinamide for 48 weeks in 2016. Is this a possible cure? Well, we'll have to keep an eye out on the ongoing research. PrEP is making great headway in rural Kenya and Uganda. Every day we also bring you interviews with community members from around the world. Right now it's right off to, well, here in the United States, where I sat down virtually with Jonathan Van Ness. So good to see you, Jonathan Van Ness. Thanks for sitting down with me.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Well, look, let's dive right in, shall we? The theme of AIDS 2020 Virtual this year is resilience. What does resilience mean to you?
I think resilience means to me being able to move between hardships and move between setbacks without falling into like a pattern of like self-harm or depression so much that like, you gotta like stay keeping your positive self-centered spirit despite setbacks. That's what resilience means to me.
It's tough though, isn't it? With all what we get thrown at us on social media and just in the general culture these days, it's hard to maintain that.
It is hard to maintain that. As someone who identifies as non-binary like myself, I think, dealing with dealing with that, and then also dealing with what society holds true for people, the way that things are marketed and the way that things are spoken about. I think that it can be very difficult to stay positive, but I think that for me it's all about what joy-filled activities can I do to kind of make that a little bit easier. So it's like, can I do a little tiny bit of yoga? Can I do like a little bit of a bit of cooking? Can I do some self-care to help myself navigate some of those hardships and setbacks that are so often encountered by gay men, non-binary people, especially when you're dealing with HIV.
Yeah, well, and speaking of HIV, I mean, you shared with the world your HIV status, and you have really, and I'm so grateful for this, joined the fight in taking stigma head on. How far do you think we have come? It's 2020. How far do you think we've come in the fight against HIV stigma? And what more do we need to do to help end it?
I think that we've made progress. I think especially within the HIV activist community, which was long established and working so hard before I arrived to the scene, that community, and I stand on the shoulders of so many people who have worked so hard and laid so much groundwork over the past decades, whether it was like ACT UP or Elton John's foundation. There's been so many people that have just done Ryan White that have just done so much incredible work, and I'm so honored to be able to lend my voice to destigmatize this and make access to healthcare more available. But I also think that, like, as far as progress is concerned, I think that, like, where people are willing to have conversations, I think that there has been progress. But I think that to those communities where they are not willing to have conversations, especially in, like, the United States, like, very Republican-controlled state legislatures, I think that we have not had a lot of progress. And I think that people that have HIV still face criminalization, access to healthcare, access to housing, all sorts of issues that make living with HIV so much harder, especially for trans and non-binary people.
Yeah, and you have been
black trans and
yeah.
non-binary people.
Well, yeah, people of color, especially in this country, and you have been so great at using your platform and your voice, whether it be through Queer Eye or through your book or through your tours with social media, to really raise awareness around you equals you. And for me, I feel like, as someone living with HIV, you equals you is the most cost-effective, easy to digest public health service announcement to smash HIV stigma, but it's still not breaking through to those communities that you just mentioned. What does you equals you mean? And what do you think we need to do to really get that message out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the onus is it's not on Black people, Black and brown people, and minorities and people of color. That's not where the stigma lies. I think that so much of the stigma is actually perpetuated by governmental inaction and by legislatures, right? Because even just in this past 2 weeks, we've had the Trump administration roll back healthcare protection for transgender people. They've defunded Planned Parenthood and their Title X program, which granted like hundreds of thousands of dollars to HIV testing in the United States, which they've defunded. So, the stigma, I believe, has been from the government from the beginning. I mean, the Reagan administration had horrific inaction on HIV/AIDS, and while we have made progress, it has been largely in defiance of and swimming upstream against the stigma that has come from, so many governmental leaders on their way down. So I think it's so important that there is stigma for HIV in Black communities and brown communities and Latino communities and gay communities and white communities and all the communities. And really, I think the onus is on, because really, if you are in a southern state or a state that has really a poor access to social safety net when it comes to HIV, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're living with HIV, it is going to be very difficult for you to access your health care. And that is because of state legislatures. So, and that is, really the onus is that's really so much of the conversation that we're having right now in the United States, because the legacy of slavery and the legacy of Jim Crow laws and the legacies of segregation have created this situation where we have such unequal access to healthcare in the United States. So it's a very layered conversation. It's a really important conversation, but I do think that the stigma, I think, is continuing to be so pervasive because we have not dealt with how HIV has interacted with racism and transphobia and the legacies of homophobia and racism and transphobia all bottled together.
Yeah, the International AIDS Conference is a place where the world's activists, scientists, health professionals, policymakers, we all come together during this amazing conference this year virtually with a single goal: to help end AIDS. What inspiration do you draw from this community?
Well, the first question, I think, is resilience. And as a community, the HIV positive and HIV AIDS community has been so resilient since its inception. I think without the support of so many governments and in the face of so much homophobia and transphobia associated with getting access to healthcare for people that are dealing with HIV, just resilience. And I take so much resilience, I take so much inspiration, and our community is a beautiful, diverse community of just amazingly strong and talented and just incredible people. So I take that, and I also just think that, as a community, it's like we just have every reason to kind of stick together, because we have everyone who I think is living with HIV and is navigating this course. We have all felt what it is to feel oppressed, not taken care of, and subjected to, literal state-sanctioned discrimination. So I think it's so important that as a community now we really work together and stick together to end that.
Yeah, and here this week we are seeing and learning of some incredible advancements and breakthroughs in HIV prevention. How have these advancements, these treatments and the science, how have they affected you personally and changed for you what it means to be a person living with HIV?
Well, for me, I mean, I was just so lucky from the time that I found out I was positive. I was able to, achieve and maintain an undetectable viral load like weeks after I, found out I was diagnosed. I've been on a total of 2 medications, for the like 8 years that I've, going on 8 years that I've, been positive. And so I think that the breakthroughs in treatment have just been, sometimes I say, like, if I didn't know that I was HIV positive, I wouldn't know that I was HIV positive. Like, my energy hasn't changed. I feel, better than I've ever felt. I'm doing gymnastics I've never done before. I'm doing ice skating I've never done before. So, in those ways, the fearful ways that I thought, how is this going to affect my life moving forward? It really has not. Those fears have not come true. So I think as far as the treatment is concerned, that's been, just really such a relief. But back to what I was saying earlier, it's like the navigating myself to finding that access to healthcare, that was really scary. And that's really, I feel like, what we got to tear down now, because it's the stigma that's like, preventing folks from being able to access that in the first place. But also I think the U equals U is such a breakthrough, and to be able to speak to that and to be able to celebrate it is so incredible. But I just so want everyone to be able to have access to that information and to that celebration, access to those medications that make that the truth, that make undetectable equals untransmittable. I mean, that's only true if everyone who's positive can get tests and then can get access to the medication. And that's such huge bureaucratic hurdles depending on where you live. So I think that's so important. And then, but yeah, I mean, yes, U equals U. And I think we all just got to keep talking about it together. And I think that that's really how we can make our way forward through stigma, is the more of us that feel safe enough to talk about it publicly, I think the more we can come together to break this down, which I do think is happening. And I'm inspired by people all the time.
When was the first time you heard about U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable? When did you learn that? And what did that moment mean for you? Because I know I'll share with you when you're done sharing with me what it meant to me.
Well, I think when it's interesting, because I had really learned about it like as I was writing my book, and when I had learned about it and kind of ran that phrase through certain people and through certain doctors as I was like fact checking my book and trying to wrap my head around it, I think that I was really like very excited. But I think it's really interesting how much even HIV stigma is baked into people who are positive, because I think my first reaction, was to be like, am I sure? Like, could that really be true? And I think that, it is, and that's what the science says, and that's what the science supports. And I think that, like, I feel very strong in that now. But I think, I think the beginning feeling was like maybe a bit of like, are we sure? And then once I was really had the time to read it and understand, I was like, well, yes, I'm sure. And yes, we are sure. But I just think that because of the years and years and years of like fear and stigma attached to this, I think it was really hard for us to all be able to, to get to that point. But people fought so hard to get to that point. And so my hats are off to those people that did that incredible work. And it also, has definitely made my life a lot easier as someone living with HIV, both not as a public figure and as a public figure.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't even know about it until just before the last World AIDS Conference, when Bruce Richmond, who started Prevention Access, hit me up and said, and I'd been living with HIV at that point for 8 years, and I didn't know it. It has allowed me to deal with the internalized stigma that I didn't even realize I had, my gosh. And I'm getting to live a true happy life, and that means I get to watch you on Queer Eye and all the fantastic things you guys are doing. Jonathan Van Ness, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you, and thank you for the love and support that you do for all of us living with HIV.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
U equals U was like somebody giving me the keys to the handcuffs that was slapped on me when I was diagnosed back in 2007. It's a message that we have to spread worldwide, something that activists and HIV community support professionals are doing all around the world, including our next guest. She's in Pakistan. It's Romesa Roy William. You are the true definition of an advocate. What does an HIV advocate mean in 2020?
Well, as the world is going towards like digitally growing up, and the pandemic has made a very uncertainty everywhere, so we need to be very sure that the HIV response must be carry on and the work doesn't stop. either in the term of the like giving the medicines to the persons who is living with HIV, or either if you are going to say about removing the stigma. It is very necessary to remove the stigma until or unless it is not going to be destructed. There are going to be increased number of violence, increased number of more abstracted things.
Yeah, I mean, stigma is a big one. Let's go back a little bit. I want to know how you personally got involved in HIV advocacy. How did this all start for you?
Well, it's all started when I first worked in a community-based organization which aims to remove the stigma and discrimination regarding the HIV and the marginalized community identities.
Tell me what HIV stigma looks like in Pakistan in 2020. How is it? You know, I'm here in the United States. Stigma is still very prevalent here and around the world. But what does HIV stigma look like in Pakistan in this day and age?
Karl, if we talk about the HIV stigma in Pakistan, first we need to know that Pakistan is an Islamic Republic of it's an Islamic Republic country, and still it has a male dominancy in the society and have a very closed society. So being a sexual minority is different thing, and even if a sexual minority have a HIV, that makes it more worse. The double minorities exist here, and it makes more vulnerable to the target population.
Yeah, and I understand. In your culture, in that culture, sex is of course taboo, so no one talks about that either. So the prevalence is probably much higher than what's perhaps reported, right? Because we don't talk about sex and the stigma associated with sex, and then on top of that, HIV and sexuality.
A father cannot talk to a son regarding the sex. Even the sex education is not allowed in our curriculums. So it is very difficult for us to make people realize that how much sex education is important. It is not for the promotion of the sex, but it is more towards the your safest practices.
So how do you break through that as an activist, as an educator, as somebody who is out there in the field? How do you break through those cultural norms to help educate and change the direction of this virus?
I'm working with two organizations. One is for the MSMs and the other one is for the transgenders. So what we did is I was working in the Hamrasmith Health Society as an advocate for the HIV. And then I got the opportunity to work with a transgender organization as well. So we integrated the both services. So what we do is if any transgender wants to get themselves tested for the HIV, and if any MSM or any individual who face the discrimination regarding the access towards the HIV, access to the HIV care centers, or either from the any care providers, to form a legal documentation, and we do work for that. And we, on the governmental level, we are working on the legislations and we are working on the protections bill. This progress is like a very in slow.
I should mention MSM refers to men who have sex with men. What are some of the other persistent barriers that you constantly face on a daily basis that block your community and other communities there in Pakistan for getting access to HIV prevention, HIV medicine and care?
The most barrier is the community itself. Because the community persons are working in the organizations, either a civil society or within the healthcare facilities, they are afraid of the breaching of the confidentiality. They say we are not ready to go and get ourselves tested because we know if we whatever the result will be, it won't be keep inside the savior. It's going to come out somehow, and we don't want that. And secondly, there is a lack of education and the lack of the information. The taboo and the stigma related HIV is really prevalent in the community in Pakistan.
Well, so that the whole messaging behind U equals U, or undetectable equals untransmittable or untransmissible. Is that messaging reaching people there in Pakistan?
Yes, we are trying to reach there, but in the ground realities, we must educate everyone regarding the self-confidence and their basic human rights.
In the last few moments with you, I want to ask, what is your biggest ask to policymakers, to healthcare providers, to donors? What's the one thing you're really wanting to ask and get through to people during this conference this year?
One thing I can ask from the policymakers is to please involve a person for those who you are making the policy. If you are making the policy for the transgender person, you must include them. And for the healthcare providers, my one thing is as kindly treat HIV positives as a human. Don't discriminate them. Give the equal opportunity, give the equal respect, and give the equal access to the services.
Thanks for joining us today. Tomorrow we're going to bring you interviews with the people behind and starring in the incredible behavioral change campaign MTV Sugar. I'm Karl Schmid, reminding you to live your best life by turning positive into a plus. I'll see you tomorrow.